Not every chess game ends up being a tactical dogfight. So in this video, I'll share 7 of the most important chess strategy principles which you can use to outplay your opponent slowly. Number 1 is to ask yourself what your opponent wants. And then, if possible, put a stop to it. A great example of this occurred in Larsen versus Medina, 1968. It's white to move here, and let's do an evaluation of the position. Although black's queen is very strongly placed, black's other pieces are not so good. The 2 black rooks are not doing very much on the closed e-file, and black's bishop is shut in. So if you think in this way, then you might also understand what black wants. Black wants to fix these problems. Perhaps move the rooks over to the open d-file, and enable the bishop to develop somewhere more active. Now, understanding all of this, Larsen played a very clever move here, and that move was queen to d5. Now this really frustrates black's plans. The rooks can't move over to the d-file now, clearly, because the white queen controls those squares. And black also can't move this rook to a square such as e6 to enable the bishop to develop, because in that case it would just lose the b7 pawn. And as is often the case when you frustrate your opponent's plans like this, black's position quickly collapsed. Let's see how. Black played king to h7, and white just looked to improve slowly, starting with rook to c4. b5 from black, rook to c6 from white, attacking this pawn now. And although black was able to trade off one pair of rooks, white was able to bring their other rook over to the open c-file, and black had to start going defensive. The rook infiltrated to c8, and then after rook to d6 and queen to a8, black had no good reply here. There's too many threats for white now. One of them is to simply take the bishop. The other is to play bishop to c5. In the game, black desperately tried rook takes d4, but then white's reply to this was crushing. Rook takes f8. Now the threat is rook to h8 checkmate, and the rook on d4 is also still under attack. So after g5, which was necessary to give the king an escape square, white simply took the rook and had a decisive material advantage. But it all began with understanding what black was wanting to do, in this case develop their worst pieces, the rooks and the bishop, and then playing one move, queen to d5, which cut across that plan. If you found that last example to be instructive, then you'll love what's coming up in the rest of this video and in my future videos. So click subscribe so you don't miss out on any of the future videos that I'm preparing for you. Now on to number 2, which is all about understanding what the opponent's last move changed about the position. Sometimes your opponent's last move can create a threat, other times it can present an opportunity. This was the case in the game Khan versus Bondarevsky 1937. It's black to move here, and black's position is already tough. This isolated pawn on d5 has a lot of pressure on it, forcing black to go passive in defense, and the knight on h6 is also out of the game. Black looked to try to get the knight back into the game by playing f6. The idea is that now knight to f7 is possible. But this move, moving the pawn from f7 to f6, also comes with a downside. This is what I'm trying to get across in this lesson. Ask what the opponent's last move changed about the position. Well, now that the pawn is no longer on f7, the e6 square is no longer controlled by black. And white looked to take advantage of this, starting with knight to d4. Knight to e6 immediately was also possible, but white wanted to keep this knight on f4 with pressure on d5. So the other knight came to d4 with the intention of knight to e6 instead. Knight to f7 from black, and there we have it, knight d to e6. Now if the black rook moves away, then this pawn on d5 is short of a defender and white can just take it. In the game, knight to e5 was played, creating a critical line, which also favours white. Let's see how. Because the moves from here were knight takes d8, black took a rook as well, and then after all the recaptures, white has knight to c5. And amazingly, this pawn on b7 can't be defended. rook to b8 would be met by bishop takes b8, and rook to d7 would see the rook captured by the knight. So it was actually this pawn on b7 which fell, and white went on to win the game with the extra material. But it all came from identifying what had just changed about the position. Back here, when the pawn moved to f6, white spotted the newly weakened e6 square and looked to target it, and well, you saw the rest. If you're serious about accelerating your progress in chess, then I work with a small number of ambitious adults through the Road to 2000 Chess Mentorship Program. You can check out all the details and apply to work with me by clicking the link in the description below. Now on to number 3, which is all about improving your worst piece. Our model game here is Churchillov versus Georgiev 2002. It's black to move here, and the first step to applying this rule is to identify what the worst piece is. In this case, I think it's pretty clearly the knight on e8. It's on the back rank, and it's stopping the two rooks from coordinating with each other. But how do you get that knight to a better square? The only two squares that it can jump to at the moment are both well controlled by white. Well, the way that black solved this, I think, was very clever. It started with the move g6. The idea is to bring the knight first to g7 and then eventually to f5. And that's exactly what happened. Knight g7, knight f5, and in just 3 moves, the knight has gone from being passive on e8 to being arguably the best piece on the board for black. Centralized with an attack on the white queen, and well, the white queen moved to h3 and the game continued from here. There was nothing immediate for black, and that's often the way in positional chess. You just improve your position slowly and gain an advantage over time. So although there was nothing that led to checkmate or a decisive win of material, we can agree that black's position has significantly improved by getting the knight to f5. And that's the way you need to think in these non-critical positions. Number 4 is to keep your opponent's worst piece bad. Think of this as the mirror image of the last one. You want to improve your own pieces and prevent your opponent from doing the same. This time our model game is Anand versus Bareyev 1992. And in this position with white to move, we can do an evaluation and see that black's light squared bishop is very bad, and we want to keep it that way. And Anand did this starting with the move b4. What this does is it keeps black's pawns locked on light squares. And as long as these pawns are on light squares, this bishop is going to have no way of getting into the game in a good way. It's going to be stuck behind its own pawn chain. Black tried to break out with a5, hoping for this capture, so that eventually there'd be the ability to play b4, and then the bishop would actually become very strong. But of course, Anand didn't allow this. He played a3, and after a few more moves, we had some captures. And all of these captures actually favoured white. What white wants to do is get to a situation where it's just this bishop playing against one of the knights, ideally. Trade everything else. Trade the queens, trade the other black knight, and then end up with a good knight versus bad bishop endgame. This is a key pillar of chess strategy. Recognise which pieces of your opponents are bad and try and keep them that way. Number 5 is to understand that whoever initiates the capture will often help their opponent. Grandmaster Igor Smirnov, another YouTuber, puts it this way: to take is a mistake. Let's illustrate this with a position from Unzicker versus Fischer, 1962, where it's black to move. Now, there is a threat in the position. If it were white's move, white would play rook takes a8. So black has to do something about that. And let's look at black's options. Well, one would be to capture on a1, but this would be exactly what GM Smirnov is talking about. To take is a mistake, because now, after these captures, white has control over the open a file. So that's no good. Another option for black could be to move the rook out of the way, something like rook a to b8. But once again, white now has full control over the only open file of the board. So what Fischer did instead was a third move, rook to a4. Now, if white wants to initiate the capture, then that's going to benefit black. See this? If white captures on a4, then black's pawn gets to a4. The knight now has to move. Let's say knight to d2, and black wins a pawn on b2. In the game, that didn't happen. But after rook to a4, it still became very uncomfortable very quickly for white. Let's run through the rest of the game, because it actually didn't last much longer. And then more pressure came along the a file. White created an escape square for their king. And eventually, black was able to create threats on the dark squares. And at this moment infiltrated to the second rank with the threat of capturing this pawn. And then a tactic appeared. Pause the video if you want to find the tactic. The last move of the game was rook takes c3, with the point being that if the rook is captured, there's checkmate on f2. But really I wanted to get across the first part of that entire sequence. In this position, rather than initiate the capture, or avoid the capture, black put their rook on a square where if white wanted to initiate the capture, it would benefit black. Number 6 is to create pawn structure weaknesses within the enemy camp. This will be illustrated with a position from Spielman versus Morosi, 1920. White to move here, and white played queen to d4, threatening checkmate. Now this gives black a tough decision to make. If you play f6 to block the checkmate threat, well then I think white's attack almost plays itself. You could get rook to g1, followed by g5, looking to open up the black king with this pawn on f6, providing white with a target. That's why the move played in the game was queen to f6. But now, after the queen trade, there's a definite pawn structure weakness that white is going to be able to target later. These pawns are doubled, this pawn is isolated. White had to play knight to g3 in order to protect their own pawn on e4, but in the long term, this is a much better endgame for white. This is the kind of thing that strong chess players are looking for. They understand that their opponents at a high level are not going to give them tactical opportunities unprovoked. They've got to create these weaknesses which can be exploited in the future, such as pawn structure weaknesses, as in this game. I know that most people viewing this will just want to watch the free lessons which I release on YouTube. But for a small number of high-achieving adults, there is the chance to work with me through the Road to 2000 Chess Mentorship Program. You can check that out and apply to work with me by clicking the link in the description below. Now, it's important to emphasize, this program isn't for everyone. I can only work with a small number of people, and my time is very limited. So only get in touch if you're really serious about achieving the maximum results in the shortest amount of time. If that does sound like you, then click the link in the description below, and I look forward to hearing from you, and I look forward to helping improve your results in the game. Finally, number 7. Transformations in the pawn structure can create new squares for your pieces. We'll illustrate this with the following position from Znosko-Borovsky versus Mackenzie, 1924. It's white to move here, and white played d takes c5. Now this is very clever because after black recaptures, the white queen is able to access the d6 square. This wasn't possible in the original position. In order for white to play queen to d6, he needed to transform the pawn structure first. Once the queen infiltrated to d6, it comes with a number of threats. First of all, it attacks the pawn on c5, so black played c4 to get that pawn out of danger. But then after queen to f6, black has got some problems on the dark squares. Queen takes g7 checkmate is the threat, so black played knight to h5, attacking the queen and also preventing checkmate. After queen to h4, black moved the knight back to g7 because previously there was the threat of capturing the rook, winning the exchange for white. So knight to g7, and then white's plan shifted. White played bishop to e3, threatening bishop to c5, creating more threats, in this case a skewer of the two rooks on e7 and f8. And the game continued from here. Now, I did an entire video on this game as part of my series on logical chess move by move. So click here to see how the rest of the game turned out. Snosko-Borovsky versus Mackenzie is one of my favourite games of the entire book. Many interesting strategic concepts which you can use to improve your own strategic middle game play.